This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. Welcome to the Friday edition. It's Friday, August 4th, and we've got a couple of interesting topics to talk about today. The big one this week, of course, has been the news with Episode 9 and a new writer on board. We're also going to talk a little bit about the first trailer for the remake of Death Wish, and we'll also kind of recap this whole discussion with Star Wars Episode 9 because the director, Colin Trevorrow, recently released a movie called The Book of Henry, and I have a review for that. I saw it a while ago. It'll probably be out on DVD here pretty soon, so I wanted to give you my opinions on that and to kind of recap and kind of put a nice little hat on what some of my comments are going to be as far as what's happening with the Episode 9 news. So yeah, this week relatively has been a slower week for movie news, and especially that feels that way because we're coming off of Comic-Con. You know, there we had a buttload, so to speak, of news with all the comic book movies, the bigger budget movies, and all that, and we had D23 the week before, so it's like, all of a sudden we have a couple of good stories, sure, but it just feels lighter than it has been before, but that's just, I think, just because we're coming off of those. But the big story this week has been about Episode 9, and we're talking Star Wars Episode 9. Right now, Lucasfilm has Colin Trevorrow on board to be the director on the film. He and his writing partner, Derek Connolly, were also going to originally be on the screenplay here. Well, actually, let's back up a little bit. First, Rian Johnson was supposed to bring in the treatment for Episode 9 since he had just written and directed Episode 8, and that's, of course, coming out in December. So he initially was on board to write the treatment for Episode 9. Then it was announced that Derek Connolly and Trevorrow would do their own pass on the script, kind of. Then a few months ago, it was kind of reported there that Johnson's treatment, supposedly, or his first draft, or whatever it was, we never found out exactly what it was, that was basically gone, and that Trevorrow and Connolly were kind of going off and doing Episode 9 on their own, with maybe a few things that Trevorrow was going to set up in Episode 9 that he wanted changed in Episode 8. But then, again, the same thing happened with Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams. That one, there were certain things that Abrams wanted in the movie, and then Rian Johnson said, well, for Episode 8, that's not going to work, so then they had to change it. So basically, the same is going to be done for Episode 8, since Trevorrow has plans for Episode 9. Now we're getting reported that, and this is from The Hollywood Reporter, that Jack Thorne has come on board to work on the script. Now, the original report itself is not outright saying that Connolly's script and Trevorrow's script is being tossed out. At the same time, it is not saying that there are only a couple of touch-up things that Thorne is going to do, that he's kind of coming on board to finalize the script. So that leads me to believe that the report is saying that the work that Thorne is going to do is going to be somewhere in between. Maybe he's going to do a page 10 rewrite, if you get what I mean. Usually the phrase is a page 1 rewrite, where basically the whole script is going to be kapooey, and all of a sudden we've got a new scriptwriter and a totally different story sometimes. Where maybe Jack Thorne is not going to come on and do a page 1 rewrite where he's going to start over, but maybe he's instead going to do something to where he fixes up a few things and then the rest of it is going to stay. At the same time, maybe he is only doing a couple of touch-ups here. But here's the thing. This news in and of itself, yeah, it's kind of significant. I mean, Episode 9 right now is going to be one of the more anticipated films of 2019. Everybody is very excited to see how this new trilogy of films is going to end. The big thing here, since Trevorrow is now not going to be on the screenplay, at least not with the most latest version, maybe he'll get a story by credit. But does this also mean that he's going to be put off as a director? Because right now, Lucasfilm, they're not exactly batting 1,000 with their directors. Because J.J. Abrams came on board and everything with Episode 7 turned out fine. Then we had some things happen in between to where Josh Trank was originally supposed to be on board for a Boba Fett standalone movie, but that fell apart. Then the thing happens last year with Rogue One to where the movie comes out initially and they see it and they're like, well, we want to tweak this, tweak that. And there's multiple reports out there. I don't even know which one to believe. But it's like some reports say the whole third act was changed. Some people say only a few things were changed. Regardless, there was some problems there with that director as well, and that was Gareth Edwards on Rogue One. And then, of course, Episode 8 goes into production and all that, and so far, we've heard nothing but great things with Rian Johnson both writing and directing the film. And, of course, the Han Solo movie. Oh boy. Your initial choices were fired. Now, of course, we've heard many different sides of this, to where maybe they just didn't want to follow the script closely, or there was this whole thing of they're making it into a straight-up comedy on the levels of a Jim Carrey Ace Ventura movie, which doesn't fit with Han Solo at all. So to kind of bring that back a minute here, I kind of thought about it, and I said, wait a minute. What was the film that George Lucas directed before Star Wars? It was a goofy teenage comedy called American Graffiti. Now, of course, that one was nominated for Best Picture and was a huge hit at the box office and everything, one of the biggest hits of that year. So now, in retrospect, it makes sense of Lucasfilm going out and getting Lord and Miller because the 21 and 22 Jump Street movies have been some of the most successful, both critically and financially, comedies in recent years. So that makes sense. You can see the lineage there of maybe why they were a good choice for the movie. But at the same time, going Ace Ventura is going too far. So, and I'm not saying that's 100% what I believe happened there, but I think the truth is somewhere in between on that. But regardless, it's a problem. And then, of course, Ron Howard's on board now, and he's tweeting out practically every day, almost like damage control, trying to say, we're fine, we're all fine here now, thank you, how are you? Anyway, so now we have this question, is Colin Trevorrow next? Like, is he going to be the next director who gets axed or who has to part ways over creative differences or whatever excuse they're going to say? Well, right now, let me tell you this. I think that this news of the Episode 9 writer is being released now, not because all of a sudden they realize that they want to change the script. I think that this has been in development for a while. But the problem was, the Han Solo stuff got out first. That was announced close to 2 months ago now. I think initially this hiring of Jack Thorne coming on and all that probably happened right around the same time that Han Solo, the news on that broke. So if they reported that right away, then it's 2 strikes right away on the Star Wars fans, because it's like all of a sudden we're having a big change in the script writing department, possibly, on Episode 9, and we've just lost the directors almost all the way through production on the young Han Solo movie. That would be doomsday for a lot of the Star Wars fans. It's like, holy crap, they don't know what they're doing. So I think that's why they're doing this now and releasing this now, because Ron Howard is on board and he's tweeting out all these images. And another thing too, Bradford Young has been confirmed he is still on the movie, which I know a lot of people were initially worried that he was going to leave and that all the other crew that were working under Lord and Miller were also going to leave, but that has not been the case, at least for Bradford Young, the cinematographer. But what a lot of people are leading to believe here, as far as Trevorrow's leaving the project, and one thing they're going to back that up with, is The Book of Henry, his movie that was just released here a couple months ago. Now, the movie was relatively independently produced and everything, and it was distributed, sure, through Focus Features, and they're a Comcast Universal company. Yeah, so they had a big studio behind them and everything, but a lot of these people who are really blowing this out of proportion here are kind of saying that The Book of Henry was a huge box office disaster. Well, here's the thing. The movie only played in like 2,000 theaters at its peak. It wasn't like this movie was expected to open to $11 million and make $50 million by the end of its gross. No. Sure, it only cost $10 million and it hasn't been able to even make half of that back, but still, this was not expected to be one of the biggest blockbusters of the summer. It wasn't even expected to be a mid-level hit. As long as it could make its budget back, that was all that they were concerned about. Now, of course, part of it was also the reviews. A lot of people just did not like the movie, and I'll have my review on it so you can get my opinions on this later. But what I kind of discovered with The Book of Henry was that Trevorrow is a director who likes to do certain types of movies. I don't know how best to phrase this, so I'll just say it this way. Jurassic World was his Spielberg spectacle movie. It's kind of the big thing on all these big special effects sometimes, and it's also, there's some human characters, some human elements here. The Spielberg eyes, that's been brought up a lot of the times with a lot of his characters, how they have that open look and that innocent look in their eyes all the time. So that was kind of his thing with Jurassic World. Plus, obviously, it was originally directed by Spielberg, too, so that's an easy connection. The Book of Henry is his Hitchcock movie. Now, again, I'll get into this in my review, but not everybody who saw the movie knows that, and some people even saw the movie might not have even interpreted it that way, and I might be the only one interpreting it that way, but that's my opinion, that The Book of Henry was kind of his way of saying, hey, this is my Hitchcock movie. And when I get to the review, I'll get a little further in depth in that. In that regard, that means that this guy, as a director, is at least putting that much thought into it. So maybe this is his Star Wars movie, obviously, but it's his George Lucas. It could also kind of be his James Cameron and Peter Jackson movie, to where it's this big sci-fi or fantasy, kind of actually a combination of both, of course, is Star Wars, his big spectacle in that regard. And that excites me because he's 2 for 2 when he's doing that. I haven't seen Safety Not Guaranteed, so maybe that's his, some other movie of his. Anyways, in those regards, yes, I like Jurassic World and I did like Book of Henry, but again, we'll get further into that and why I think it's a Hitchcock movie really more than just a Colin Trevorrow movie once we get into the review. And one more thing I will say here is, again, a lot of people are really jumping the gun here and saying that the report is saying that this is a page one rewrite. Well, the report, it does not clue us in as far as, is this a page one rewrite or is this just a touch-up? We don't know yet. And anybody who is saying that, they're kind of leaping to conclusions anyways and kind of jumping on board the speculation train, and that is leading to them thinking that Trevorrow is going to get kicked off of the director's chair. At the same time, I'm saying right now, I think Trevorrow is going to stay on board. And I think they're not going to fire him or they're not going to make him part ways or anything. But I'm not saying it's impossible that he gets kicked off. I mean, for all we know, in the next couple of weeks, we do get a report that says, yep, Trevorrow's gone. But I say give it to the end of September or maybe early October. If he's still on board, then as long as we don't have another Lord and Miller case where they get fired halfway through production, Trevorrow is going to be on board the whole way. He's going to see the movie all the way through and we'll be fine. If he does leave, then again, I'm not going to, all of a sudden be surprised and just, totally shocked by this, because this has been known to happen. We kind of saw the inverse of this back in January and February with the whole Ben Affleck situation with the Batman. At first, he was gone as the director. Then, a few months later, he's gone as the writer as well. Same thing could happen here, just in the inverse of that. It could happen. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but right now I'm not going to leap to the conclusions and say that he has to be fired and say that he's going to be fired and saying that he's going to skip out on the movie. Right now, I think he's going to stay on, but I'm not going to be totally shocked if something happens to where he leaves the project. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about here is something that some people have watched and have loved. Other people, most people, from what I've seen, have watched and not liked, and that's this first trailer for the remake of Death Wish. Now, personally, I am not an aficionado when it comes to the original Death Wish series with Charles Bronson. I know some people it's near and dear to their hearts, but for me, it's just another kind of low-beat Chinatown wannabe film from the 70s. For me, it's not one of these beloved franchises. I know for some people it is, but anyways, so they're announcing this new remake here, and it's Eli Roth who directed it, who I run hot and cold with as a director. Like, the first half of Cabin Fever's pretty good. Second half, not so good. And then Green Inferno, the first half is really boring. The second half, until you get to the last 5 minutes, is actually kind of entertaining. I wasn't exactly sure if his style was going to fit with a Death Wish movie. And then they cast Bruce Willis, who lately has been kind of phoning it in with every performance he gives. Obviously, there's some exceptions here and there, but the guy really has not been on his A game in a long while. So I'm like, okay, is this just going to be another Bruce Willis movie and they just happen to be directed by Eli Roth? Or is this actually going to be something good? Now, the trailer has not convinced me it's going to be something terrific by any means, but it's giving me this vibe that, yeah, it'll be serious at times, and yes, the original film was actually pretty serious, and it was more considered a thriller than anything else, and it took the subject matter very seriously. In this case, it looks like, yeah, they'll take it seriously for a while, but then they're going to go into this kind of fun Bruce Willis kind of action revenge movie. Kind of like if The Fifth Element was set on Earth and if his character from that, Corbin Dallas, was all of a sudden now really, really ticked off at all the people who killed his family. So that's one thing. And then a lot of people have also been comparing this to John Wick. Now, the John Wick movie, I know I'm totally alone on this, and I really saw the movie really late. Everybody else had already seen it. The second movie was already in production and everything by the time I saw it. But I was just not that impressed with John Wick as a movie. I mean, obviously some of the action beats were good and some of the action scenes were great, but other parts of the movie just felt like a video game cutscene that I was watching, and I was like, well, when do I get to pick up the control? Oh, I don't get to. I'm just watching the movie. And yeah, I've never really been all that impressed with Keanu Reeves as an actor, so that part didn't excite me by any means. Yeah, in this regard, a lot of people are comparing it and saying it's, John Wick is the superior film and all that, but I don't know. And for all we know, yeah, maybe Death Wish will be a horrible movie, but this first trailer I actually found entertaining. A lot of people have been especially criticizing the use of the song, which if you haven't seen the trailer, they use Back in Black by AC/DC in there. Personally, I didn't mind that. I thought it was a well cut together trailer. And that's another thing too that a lot of people just completely forget about with these first trailers, is that is just a company putting together the footage and presenting the trailer. And that's like 90% of the time. There are some directors that cut their own trailers and say, I can only put this in here. But this is a case, kind of reminds me of the Star Trek Beyond first trailer, which was cut to the Beastie Boys song Sabotage, which turned out to be a pretty significant part of the movie. But immediately everybody thought, oh, they've gone overboard on the new Star Trek and all that. Immediately everybody said, oh, now that movie's gonna suck. As it turns out, the movie comes out, a few months later, and it's one of the best of the new Star Trek movies. So Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This is just a trailer. It doesn't mean, we can't all of a sudden say the movie's going to be absolutely awful by this. And some people just rub the wrong way in that way. And I don't know. I just don't fit myself in with that, I guess. I thought it was a decent trailer. I mean, I'm not going to call it the best trailer of the year or anything, but just as a 2-minute little piece of advertising for a movie, it looked like something kind of fun. Something, you kind of turn your brain off for an hour and a half and sit and watch Bruce Willis kill people. And I'll tell you what, believe it or not, and again, Bruce Willis, he is a good actor. I don't want to put anybody off in that regard. I do think the guy has a lot of talent. It's just that recently some of his projects have not really capitalized on that. But he's a guy who can really get the comedic timing down perfect. And some of the moments in the trailer, especially at the end when he's sitting with the therapist and everything, a lot of those moments I think do highlight when this guy can hit those comedic timing moments perfectly, and when he's on board and when he's engaged in the script and in the movie he's in, he can be really good. And at least that was a good part of the trailer, at least. All right, yeah, so let's go ahead and I'll recap here my review for the Book of Henry. This has been out, the movie's been out for, about 2 months now, roughly. So, again, a late thing here. But yeah, I think it does kind of pinpoint what I'm going for when I'm making these comments here about Trevorrow as a director. A lot of the people who have seen this movie have really come to sit down and watch what Colin Trevorrow would bring to his smaller scale production before he takes on the giant that will be Star Wars Episode 9. And while, sure, I'm curious to see more of his work, and I really had a blast with Jurassic World, the ads are what drew me into the film and not necessarily the filmmaker. Well, the result is one of the most weird and offbeat movies that's aiming for the main film market that I can only give so many details about because there's a lot of spoiler territory to walk around, so I'll do my best. The film features Henry, a boy of 11, who is extremely gifted when it comes to speaking, mathematics, and reasoning. He also knows his sciences, the stock market, mortgage payments, and is the father figure to his younger brother, Peter. While he takes care of the financials for his mom, too, he's also a kid who has a crush on the next-door neighbor. The trouble starts when he realizes that her stepfather is abusing her, and after all of his attempts to bring an end to the violence, he decides that going full R-rated Home Alone style and killing the stepfather is the best way to go. After doing his research, the only trouble Henry faces is getting his mother to help him do the unthinkable to help the unprotected. I'll start this section of the review where I give the positives with this. Most of the performances are excellent. Naomi Watts is a very talented actress who can turn it on whenever she wants, and she turns in a pitch-perfect performance for what this movie is asking from her. She's strong when she needs to be, vulnerable when she's not so strong, and reliant on Henry when the plot needs her to in order to continue the story. Also good is Jaden Lieberer as Henry, who also had a nice performance as a youngster in St. Vincent. Funny enough, alongside Naomi Watts, whose performance and character I did not enjoy in that film. But their dynamic here really makes for a very entertaining film. The next thing I'll credit, funny enough, is the last 20 minutes. While the quality of the cinematography, art direction, score, and editing are fine for the first 80%, the last 20 minutes really rack up the tension as the final steps are made to try and get the stepfather out of the picture. In particular, the editing really was well done, and especially with the audience I was with, if anybody was bored, that last 20 minutes really brought them back in. The final thing I'll mention here, and it's what really saves the movie for me, is the realization I came across not long before that last 20 minutes. Trevorrow basically is paying homage to the type of films made by an historic Hollywood figure, Alfred Hitchcock. If you've seen the movie and are lost by this last statement, let's put everything together. The icy blonde heroine, played by Watts? Check. The murder aspects while trying to kill the stepfather? Check. Dark comedy surrounding everybody treating the killing of him as nothing special? Check. And the biggest check mark of all is the mother of all spoilers with this movie, but I'll say it's one that links back to one of his 60s classics. Those of you who have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Now here's the thing about the weaker elements of the film. The first half of the movie is this light comedy film about Henry and his smarts, and the second half of the film, where the whole murder plot picks up, is a totally different animal in mood and feel, and the transition is rough, to put it lightly. I really felt like the brakes were slammed on with the feel and mood of the first half, and now all of a sudden, we're in a totally different movie. And as a matter of fact, multiple times I found myself asking out loud, what movie am I watching? Also, while the neighbor girl that Henry has a crush on is far from a character you root against, I just didn't feel like she had enough character development or screen time to justify my being invested in an 11-year-old plotting to kill an adult. I mean, she was fine and everything, but I just didn't feel that involved with her as a character. And speaking of underdevelopment, the same goes for the stepfather character. The film doesn't even give him a chance to being anything but a one-dimensional stereotype. All he is the bad neighbor who yells at the other neighbors for not keeping their yards clean, and I felt like if I'm going to root against him enough to side with the, quote, heroes of the movie and root against him as they try to kill him, he needs more development, and I need more hatred to get to that point. One last thing. Sarah Silverman plays a character who's best friends with Naomi Watts' character, and she adds absolutely nothing to the plot. She's not involved with trying to kill the stepfather and only criticizes Henry for being smarter than she is. Really, all she does in the movie is have a few meaningless conversations with Watts, then goes and drinks. She feels like padding. I mean, the time spent on her could have been spent on making us really like the neighbor girl or hating her stepfather or both. But no, let's just give it up for Silverman and her drinking. So yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one. But while there are a lot of things that will stick in my memory about this that will make me remember the film in a less than positive light, I think the performances overcome those flaws enough for me to say it's worth seeing. There's also the nods to Hitchcock, which if you've seen the film, maybe you didn't pick up on and that you might want to rewatch to find them. I don't know, I haven't heard anybody else say this, so I might be crazy. But you know what? So is this movie, so that just might be a match made in heaven. Even if you're not a fan of the subject matter here, you have to commend Trevorrow at least for this. He has a singular vision, and he is thinking outside the box throughout the whole film. My rating is a 6 out of 10. All right, there you go. That's gonna about wrap it up here for today's edition of the Plagmanrules Podcast. Can't really think of much going on here. I mean, obviously, yeah, we just had Comic-Con and D23 a few weeks ago, so a lot of the movie news has been a little slow lately. We kind of talked about that earlier. So, of course, we'll have the weekend box office to talk about on Monday. And I kind of mentioned it last time, but The Hero was a movie I saw a while ago. I'd like to do a review on that eventually. And then also Atomic Blonde and The Big Sick. I've seen both of those movies now. So if we're really out of ideas next week for what to do on the show, we can always go to those. All right, so yes, I'll be back again, and for sure we'll do box office reports on Monday, and if any late-breaking news comes up, we'll talk about that as well, and we might have some time for some reviews as well. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition. This has been the Plagmanrules Podcast.